I'm Sue Holliday. I'm acting Senior Associate Dean at the present time, and I'm here in lieu of Alex Ellis, our Dean, who has had to apologise for tonight's event, but he obviously is sending all his very best wishes to Martin, and thank you very much indeed for coming. It's my great pleasure just to let you know a little bit about some of the achievements of our faculty recently. Obviously, from an architectural point of view, there's recently been the 2011 New South Wales Architectural Awards ceremony, which was actually held in Melbourne. The most important award for some of our alumni is that Glenn Murcutt, who is both an alumnus and professor here, received the award for enduring architecture, which I think is a fabulous acknowledgement of Glenn's important work. At the other end of the spectrum, Matt Chan, who is also a UNSW alumnus, received the Emerging Architect Award for his special contribution to design research, which is fabulous, so let's acknowledge that. The President's Prize in these awards goes to an individual who made a meaningful contribution to the industry, and I don't know whether Peter is here tonight. My glasses on, see. I think not, but Peter Mould, who is also a visiting professor and New South Wales Government architect, won this award. So congratulations. And then, of course, our Dean, who, as you know, also has a very successful architectural practice, Zarnas Associates. His firm received an architecture award in public architecture for Hillingdon Aspen School as part of the BER. There must be one of the only buildings in the BER program to receive an award, but he did. And in addition, he also received 3 commendations in the residential housing, residential multiple housing, and commercial architecture categories. So congratulations to Zarnas. I think you'll agree that's a fantastic result for our faculty. But on top of that, there was a University of New South Wales Industrial Design Award, and our graduate, Chris Fox, received a silver in the Dyson Awards for his design of a personal flotation device for water sports called the Ninth Life. I don't know if Chris is here tonight, but if he isn't, I think we should congratulate him for that award. And finally, before I pass over to... Don't bored, Martin. Finally, before I pass over to Martin, there are 3 UNSW Built Environment graduate designers, Kate Stanstreet, Lily Tandiani, and Anthony Pappas, have secured places in the Society for Responsible Design Change 11 Sustainable Design Exhibition, which is running from the 1st to the 12th of August at the Powerhouse. So we have 2 more days to dash along to that exhibition and have a look at their work at the Powerhouse. So that's where our faculty is at the moment, and I think it's a great achievement, and congratulations to everybody. Now, Martin. Martin is our Professor of Construction Management at the University of New South Wales here in Sydney. He's a Fellow of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors and a Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Building and a visiting professor at the University of Loughborough in the UK and the University of Hawaii in the States. Martin was an advisor to the Australian Royal Commission into the building industry, the Federal Senate inquiry into the building and construction industry, and is a very good and strong member of the Australian Government's Built Environment Industry Innovation Council, which I happen to chair. We advise the government on innovation policy and reform, and Martin is a fantastic representative on that. And tonight, we're very, very pleased that he's going to talk to us about how consulting and contracting firms in the construction and engineering industry, both large and small, innovate to translate sustainability into improved business performance. So please would you all join me in welcoming Martin Loosemore.
Yeah, so thanks, Sue, for that, that welcome. I've noticed over the years that when I watch these types of presentations that most invited speakers divide their speeches into three parts. The first part is where they say how honoured they are to be able to speak at a function like this. So I certainly am honoured, given the quality of the speakers that have come before me. The second stage is where they sometimes go on at great lengths to declare how unworthy they are of the honour. And the third stage is where they prove conclusively that their second statement was absolutely correct. So without any further ado, I'm going to move on to the third stage straight away. And then I thought, thinking about this lecture, I should do something that sort of fits in with Utzon's spirit of architecture. And I thought, well, over the next 40 minutes, what I'd like to do is actually offer the contrary point of view on the sustainability debate. And what I'm going to try and do is offer a note of caution that in our industry's enthusiasm to embrace sustainability as a cause with our need to actually address the massive challenges that lie ahead for us as an industry, we are all vulnerable to invisible yet dangerous cognitive biases which could sabotage the cause. And I've decided that I'm going to split my presentation to make it more tolerable for you. I'm going to split the presentation into three parts. The first part of my presentation, I'm going to be looking at the social and political forces that are actually driving the sustainability debate. In the second part of my presentation, I'll be looking at the cognitive biases that I believe can sabotage the whole debate. And in the third part of the presentation, I'm going to be looking at practical strategies for business in overcoming those cognitive biases. So without further ado, I'll... now then, I've just got to figure out how to do this. Next, sorry. There we go, how's that? So I thought I'd actually start with an apology for the rather emotional appearance of this very first opening slide. But in my view, the reason I put it there is because it reflects the problems in the sustainability debate. And much of this has to do with the word green, which has in recent years acquired a powerful new meaning in corporate life that it never really did before. And the word is bound up with all sorts of images that are very powerful, compelling and hard to resist. Words like ethics, morality, stewardship of our countryside and our landscapes, governance, openness and responsibility, and of course that ubiquitous but nebulous term sustainability come to mind. And the green revolution, as many people call it, is in fact being driven by some pretty startling statistics. For example, if you look at this recent data about world populations, we can see that the world population over the next 40 years is going to increase by approximately 30%. Urban populations are going to increase by over 100%. Currently, cities occupy about 3% of the world's land surface, but for the first time in history, over 50% of the world's population now live in cities. And in Australia, it's 75% of the population. We're one of the most urbanised countries in the world. And 98% of this growth is actually being driven in the developing world, where the growing middle classes are predicted to drive up global emissions by over 40%. Which in turn, if you believe that emissions leads to climate change, appears to be leading to increasing number of extreme weather events. And the blue line is a graph of temperature over the last 50 years, and the black dotted line is a parallel graph of disasters. And on top of this, we seem to be facing the concept of peak oil, where we, by 2050, will have exhausted most of our current known stocks of oil. Stocks of oil, which of course we're so dependent. And in fact, in the next 40 years, it's predicted that China alone will be consuming over 50% of our existing oil stocks. And more people are living in areas of environmental stress, not just in developing countries, but in the developed OECD countries as well. And so we seem to be facing a rather depressing picture. And all of this is also compounded by the fact that if you look at the Earth's carrying capacity, and I'm rushing through this because I'm not going to spend too much time on this, if you look at the world's carrying capacity over the last 40 years, that's actually reduced by 50%, while at the same time, our consumption per capita of the Earth's resources has increased by 50%. And each of these dots represents a country which, if it's over the bottom dotted line, is consuming more than the world can provide if other countries are actually consuming the same amount. And Australia is right at the very top. It's one of the worst countries in terms of carbon per capita in the world. In fact, it's the worst, we're the highest carbon per capita country in the world, and also we're one of the least energy efficient countries in the world. So, as I said, the story really appears to be a rather depressing one. We seem to be on a dangerously unsustainable path. And in fact, if you really want to be depressed, I recommend a book by Sir Martin Rees, who is the president, who was the president of the Royal Society in the UK, the UK's chief scientist, who recently wrote a book called Our Final Century, which predicted that the human race has only got 50-50 chance of surviving the next 100 years as a result of climate change, pandemics, experiments gone wrong, deadly viruses, and self-replicating machines that are going to devour our atmosphere. And if that book isn't enough to make you crawl under a stone, then nothing will. But actually there is one book that will make you crawl under a stone before, and that's the second book that he wrote, which was called Our Final Hour. But of course, having painted that rather depressing picture, there are of course huge opportunities in this as well. And in thinking how we respond to this, as a business and academic community, our hands are tied by the inertia of government policy response, Copenhagen, the lobbying activities of powerful hydrocarbon industries which still make their profits out of business externalities, and by political and market systems which don't promote the type of long-term thinking that is needed to move the world to a more sustainable path. And in this environment, in my view, it's critical that private sector innovation steps up to fill the leadership gap. And our industry is right on the front line. Oop, I've done it again. Our supply chains are dependent, probably more than any other industry, on Australia's highest carbon emitting industries, such as cement and steel. And the way that we plan, the way we design, the way we construct, and the way that we manage our cities lie at the very heart of making our world a more sustainable place. And I apologise to the architects in the room for that really tacky slide. But innovation is risky, especially in sustainability. Not only do companies have to deal with a policy void, they also have to deal with an increasingly paranoid public, where any threat to our health, safety, well-being, or wealth has the potential to be blown out of total proportion. I'm going to have to figure out a better way of doing this. A zeitgeist which German sociologist Ulrich Beck famously called our risk society. And this paranoia, which we see all around us, has been driven over the last 50 years by advances in science and technology which make it possible to measure risks in smaller and smaller amounts, revealing literally thousands of new threats to our health, our well-being, and to our prosperity that we never knew existed before. And this has led, in turn, to a chasm to emerge between the public's understanding of risk and the understanding of the professions and scientists and the institutions who are empowered to manage risk on their behalf. Now, while we, as part of this managerial elite, may have one idea about the impact of our projects on the communities where we do business, it's more or less certain that they will have a very different perception indeed. And, as far as they're concerned, that's all that matters. And they can get very, very angry if we ignore them. When I was writing this presentation, I thought my mind went back to the 1980s with the BSE crisis, the the mad cow crisis in the UK. And I always remember a quotation by Michael Portillo, who was the Secretary of State then in government, who said, "It's not mad cows that we're dealing with, it's actually mad people." And I think the same thing applies to our industry in many ways. The majority of people that we're dealing with in the community simply don't understand the science behind the sustainability debate. And if we're totally honest, nor do we. None of us in this room are probably able to make a rational, informed, and credible assessment of the risks of climate change and the risks surrounding sustainability in our industry. And what this does is reduce the debate to the only thing we have left to fall back on. And that's on what we can find on the internet, what we can find on Facebook, Twitter, our ideologies, our personal experiences, our emotions, the opinions of those that we actually mix with, our close family and friends and social circles, and any simple sound bites which are designed by politicians to try and capture our imagination and reduce the message to almost childlike level. Great example is the big new toxic tax, which we hear about on 6 o'clock news every evening. And only this week, we read in the newspapers that some members of the community are now talking about an odourless, colourless, invisible gas, which now appears to be worthless as well. So research shows that most people operate at such a simple level when they're talking about sustainability that their attitudes towards issues like climate change even vary on a day-to-day basis depending on what the weather's like. So, for example, if it's a sunny, warm day, people are much more concerned about climate change, carbon emissions and sustainability than they would be on a cold, cloudy day. People completely ignore long-term trends, which is a well-known cognitive bias in risk research known as making the base rate error. So yes, we do have scientists to tell us the facts, but unfortunately not all of these scientists are as rational, independent and unemotional as we would hope. And if we believe them, it's not because we understand them, it's because they seem to have a great personality, they seem to have some eminence in society, they seem to have good communication skills. But the problem with this is that it also leaves the whole field of sustainability open to a whole range of uninformed, self-proclaimed gurus who often adopt extreme positions which further confuses and polarizes the whole debate. So in response to all of this uncertainty and the public's increasing perception of the impact of our industry on their lives, the governments around the world have introduced a whole new raft of regulations and legislation which increasingly stresses the need for us to consult communities in which we do business and to consider the impact of our business activities on the environment and society in which we do business. And this has required us to make a paradigm shift in management from traditional narrow conceptualizations of management focused on one dimension, money, to more inclusive notions of corporate social responsibility, we're calling it, even if it's not been accompanied by particularly helpful advice on how to actually integrate this into our business strategies. So sustainability, despite the lopsidedness of the whole debate about green, is not just about decarbonising our industry. Management's new palette is now made up of a number of colours. It's also about our social and ethical responsibilities to the communities and in which we do business and our workforce. And of course, we have to balance this with our economic responsibilities to our shareholders. And how we incorporate this into our business strategies is arguably, in my opinion, one of the greatest challenges that's faced management in the current generation. Because this is going to require us to think in new ways. It's going to require us to think in 3 dimensions, not in 1 dimension anymore. It's going to require us to be more open and transparent. It's going to require us to be more inclusive and consultative in the way we do business, to consider a wider range of stakeholders than just our shareholders in our business, and to develop new metrics to measure success in our business. It seems to me that the principles of neoclassical economics, which have driven business and management for so long, appear to be shifting to a new form of conscious capitalism, which is much more sensitive to the externalities that we produce when we're doing business on the society in which we're doing it. And consequently, in response to this, we're all bombarded with calls to go green, to think green, to go beyond green, whatever that means. Green is good. Green is everything. Green is even chic now, and you can't afford not to do it. And certainly, there's no shortage of advice out there on how to green our business. And it's when you read this literature that you really start to get worried. And this brings me to the second part of my presentation. It's when you read this literature that you really start to realise that it hits all the emotional hot buttons, which all good salespeople know cause human beings to behave irrationally and impulsively. For example, there's a strong sense when you read the literature in this area that it's free, sustainability is free. Moving to a more sustainable business model doesn't have to cost your business anything. You also get a strong sense of urgency from the literature. The door is closing. If you don't act quickly, your business will miss out. And you also get a sense that the literature is playing to our need for relativity, our need to compare ourselves with other people. Your competitors are doing it, and therefore so should you. And of course, the literature tells us that there are amazing opportunities to be gained from moving to a more sustainable business model. When I read this literature, the authors appear to be the doctors, the companies appear to be treated as the patients, and their managers are expected to give themselves to these consultants blindly to be healed by their incredible knowledge. And many companies do, tempted by tempted by incredible opportunities, reduced operating costs, increased profits, dollar savings, easier finance, cheaper capital, lower insurance, increased productivity from your workforce, happier, more motivated staff, reduced staff turnover, and increased retention. You actually attract better quality staff as well, and then even work for you for less. These are the sorts of claims that are made in the sustainability literature. Sustainability seems to tick all the boxes. But not only does this message reduce the debate to one simple dimension, it grossly oversimplifies the complexities of moving to a more sustainable business model for business. And many of these claims, if you actually look at these reports and look into the methodologies that are used to produce the recommendations, many of these claims, even from the most reliable sources, are based on research that simply would not stand up to peer review. The research is often based on opinion-based survey data, overgeneralized and misconstrued evidence, incredibly small samples, biased samples, and sometimes on no evidence at all. The literature in this area radiates unequivocality. It's heavily deterministic, and it's laden with positive value. And the aim is to make us to believe that the benefits are universal and beyond dispute, whereas the reality is that they certainly are still very contentious. And you'll find that if you look at the experiences of many companies that have actually tried moving to a sustainable business model, especially small companies, that they've certainly had a very different experience to that which you would suggest they'd have when you read the literature. For example, the Grattan Institute recently produced a report that looked at 130 government grants to encourage companies to be more sustainable, costing $7 billion over the last 10 years. Only 4 of those business initiatives now remain as a going business concern. All the others have fallen by the wayside. And in America, we're seeing a rising tide of green litigation against developers, architects, and rating agencies that have promised clients that the building's going to perform to a certain level, and whose clients are actually who've been disappointed and taken action against those concerned. And some of these buildings are very high, and the clients are very prominent indeed. There is some fantastic research out there. There is some good research out there. But most readers of the mediocre and very poor research, which tends to dominate the sustainability literature, won't be aware of the fundamental flaws in method which have been used to arrive at the very distorted results, which it's very easy to read about. So the claims of amazing benefits tend to get accepted into the sustainability mythology to be quoted and reinforced by further studies, which then become equally flawed, or even more flawed. It is simply irresponsible to publish any results based on a sample of 5, which I was reading a very influential report only half an hour ago, which many people quote, which was certainly based on a very small sample like that. But the biggest and best firms realise that there's a problem. So companies like Brookfield Multiplex, for example, have just completed a much more thorough piece of research on this building, 1 Shelley Street, which is a 6-star rated commercial office building in town, where they looked at 2,800, a sample of 2,800 occupants, and they did this in association with the University of New South Wales and, in fact, the University of Technology, Sydney. So the problem is with this research, of course, it's not publicly available. I think Brookfield Multiplex is now making this publicly available. So the problem is that the majority of SMEs that dominate our industry, represent 95% of the industry, simply haven't got the capacity to do this type of research. And what they have to rely on is the sort of information which I've just been talking about. They've just got to use whatever they can get. And they're not going to be aware of the many risks that are involved in moving to a sustainable business model, which are much, much harder to find written about. So what are the sort of risks I'm talking about? Well, there are regulatory risks of complying with increasing numbers of often conflicting regulations, guidelines and standards. There's a lack of consistency as well in the tools that we can use to measure performance, particularly in the area of social responsibility. And regulatory changes overnight can actually transform the return on investment associated with a sustainable or green building, whatever. There are technical risks associated with working with complex new technologies and testing technologies that sometimes blur the boundaries between traditional products and services and may not perform as planned. And there are long-term unintended consequences associated with these new technologies. And if you read the case law in this area, in some cases, these technologies have actually led to catastrophic failure and even death. And how do we incorporate these new technologies into existing buildings, where the main challenge of sustainability lies? And there are supply and demand chain risks of working with clients or subcontractors and suppliers that simply don't believe, even though they may say they believe, simply don't believe in sustainability or misrepresent their skills and knowledge in this area. And there are financial risks of, insurance alone is a major issue. I mean, this is a completely new area for the insurance market, which they don't understand yet. We may have to pay increased prices for materials and subcontractors. We may lose traditional customers that simply want to keep employing on the basis of lowest price. We have got increased compliance costs, increased consultation costs, we've got increased reporting costs and increased training costs. So it's certainly not cost-free. And there are legal risks as well. There are legal risks associated with promising clients buildings that simply don't perform as intended. And there's a lack of clarity over who is actually responsible for the performance of green buildings. Is it the certifiers? Is it the designers? They seem to be in the firing line at the present moment. Is it the builder? Is it the developer? Or is it the actual person that sells the green building? And again, if you look at the case law, there are lots of very scary cases of people promising things that they simply can't deliver. And there are governance risks that involve new stakeholders in boardroom decisions, and of course there are reputational risks as well of not meeting the high expectations that you're communicating to your clients and customers. Now, in my view, the suppression of these risks is completely counterproductive to the sustainability debate and to our cause. We know from research and risk management that if we artificially suppress risks in complex systems, then these systems become increasingly fragile while exhibiting at the same time no outward signs of stress. And these systems tend to become more vulnerable to what we call black swan events, which lies far from statistical norms, and no one sees coming, and that tend to break down organisations. For example, I just want to think of some examples. I mean, the global financial crisis is a wonderful example of a black swan event, but more recently, we saw the collapse of the solar power industry in New South Wales as a result of the New South Wales government overnight, unexpectedly, reducing its tariffs on their solar bonus scheme. Eventually, all constrained systems will collapse. So it's critical we acknowledge the upside and the downside of the sustainability debate. But why is it our reasoning is so flawed in this area? This brings me to the last part of my presentation. Well, we know from the sustainability debate that it's a highly emotive area. And this is why it's so polarised. It's very hard to sit on the fence. But research in the behavioural and social sciences could give us a little bit more insight into why our thinking is so positively skewed when we think about sustainability issues. For example, we know that people's perceptions of risk, our perceptions of risk, are contagious. They spread through communities like us, like diseases spread through communities. We get infected. Our perception of risk is partly heavily determined by the people that we mix with. We get infected with the people around us. And these days, we're all so well connected, our social networks are so dense, it's incredibly difficult to avoid ideas being spread through communities with any check and balance, no matter how inaccurate or biased they may be. And this tends to create a herding effect, where we tend to assume things not on the basis of evidence, but on the basis of other people's behaviour. And this is just natural. For example, you know when you walk past a restaurant, if there are lots of people in a restaurant, even though you've never eaten there, you tend to assume that there must be great food being served. And you see this herding effect when you look at the sustainability strategies of many of the so-called leading companies in our industry who claim to be leaders in sustainability. And when you look at their sustainability strategies, they're all more or less doing the same thing. There's a lot of strategy convergence in the area of sustainability, a phenomenon which in academia we call industry isomorphism, where there's a tendency for firms in an industry over time to converge around an industry norm. So there are actually very few firms doing anything different in the sustainability area. And I'll talk about why that's so in a few minutes. But we also know, like in a community like us perhaps in this room, where everybody is really trying to push the sustainability and believe passionately in sustainability, that there's also something called an habituation effect, where people constantly immersed in a risky environment gradually become less and less sensitive to the risks around them. This is why people who live around nuclear power stations are never the ones to complain about nuclear power. They're always people from the outside. And it's why people who drive a lot, for example, tend to be the most likely to engage in unsafe driving behaviour. As the late Abraham Kaplan, a famous American philosopher, said, the more we think we know about something, the harder it is to accept an alternative point of view. And he called this phenomenon learned helplessness. And I sometimes think, we may be suffering from learned helplessness, possibly in this community. And learned helplessness leads at an organisational level to institutional blind spots, which often end up bringing organisations down. And we also know that we live in two worlds. We live in a social world and we live in a business world. And we also know that these worlds are best kept far apart. Again, think about your own experiences. How would you feel if someone, when you give them a gift, ask you how much that gift costs? Sustainability is a similar sort of issue, really, because it spans these two worlds. So it seems bad taste to ask how much it costs. It just seems to be the right thing to do. And incidentally, the right thing to do is a slogan that's used by a very large number of the largest organisations in our industry when they're talking about sustainability. And then, of course, there's the lure of ownership, which often accompanies messages like this, slogans like One Planet Living. That message is designed to make us think, and it may well be true, that we're all in this together. Our family, our children, our aunts, our future generations are all tied up in this debate. And we know from research in risk management that ownership has a suppressing effect on our perceptions of risk. Again, think of your own experiences. When we own something, we become emotionally attached to it, and we tend to play down the risks associated with it. This is why you should never buy a house from the old couple who've lived there for 50 years and brought their family up there, because they would tend to overestimate the value of the house and not see the sorts of flaws that we would see as purchasers. So sustainability has a strong placebo effect. It makes us feel good, it makes us feel ethical, it makes us feel like we're doing the right thing, it makes you feel safe. But the reality may be very different indeed. So what can companies do, what can organisations do to actually avoid these cognitive biases that I've talked about that may actually cause them to play the risk associated with sustainability down? Well, our research tells us that there are a range of strategies that companies can use. First of all, our research tells us that organisations need to be objective about sustainability. No preaching, no emotions. Use reliable data. Measure what you're doing. Don't be afraid to measure and report what you're doing. And measure the return on investment associated with sustainability initiatives. There is nothing that's bad taste or untoward about doing that. Second bit of advice is collaborate. Today, very few, the challenges that face us are so huge that very few firms have the capacity to innovate alone. So innovation in the future is going to happen between firms. It's not going to happen within firms, as it did in the past, when these large organisations like ICI and IBM invested millions of dollars in very large research and development programs. And innovation is also going to occur just as much outside our industry as it is going to in our industry. In fact, innovation is probably going to be driven from outside our industry more than it's going to be driven from within our industry. So to facilitate this, we need to develop deeply integrated business models that allow us to work through many layers of the supply chain in partnership with suppliers, manufacturers, with other industries. And it's those unique partnerships that you form as a business that's going to determine your ability to differentiate yourself as an organisation in the sustainability debate and to derive genuine competitive advantage from doing so. And our research tells us that all good strategies, sustainability strategies, are values-based. This means that you've got to recognise and leverage your unique corporate identity, your unique values, your unique culture, your unique core capabilities as an organisation. And many organisations forget about this. It's the one thing that your competitors can't copy. It's your most important, in Michael Porter's terms, your most inimitable asset, the asset that other companies cannot copy. And I think it's often glossed over in the sustainability debate that every company is different and are at a different stage of sustainability maturity. Not every company has to be a leader in the sustainability cause. It's okay to go slow. In fact, probably for 95% of the companies in our industry, that's probably going to be the best approach. Leadership is critically important. The board needs to set a sustainability strategy and lead from the top. They need to set clear, ambitious, but achievable goals and an inspiring mission and vision to drive the organisation forward. And managers must enact those strategies. They must act them out. And they must be seen to be acting them out by people at the lower part of the organisation. And organisations must lobby, they must pioneer, and they must influence policy and regulations at a local, national, and at an international level. Leaders need to make choices. That's what strategy is all about. And they need to trade off their strengths. They mustn't try to be everything to everybody. Another lesson that we've learned is that it's important to avoid sustainability fiefdoms in organisations. Don't build castles. Don't build a big bureaucracy around sustainability in your organisation. No one owns the knowledge that's needed to deal with these challenges. And once you start thinking that you own knowledge, and it's your little area of responsibility and power, then you've really got some problems. Best way to do it is to build sustainability into everybody's job description so it becomes a sense of collective responsibility throughout the organisation. People really shouldn't be thinking about sustainability. It should be embedded in everything they do. And very importantly, you need to broaden and deepen your gene pool. Diversity is the key to deal with sustainability in organisations. If you're going to innovate in this area, you need knowledge from as many different sources as you can get it. And if you're going to have good ideas, you need to have lots of them. And the best way to have lots of ideas is to get lots of people involved in your organisation from lots of different disciplines. We need to tap into the sciences. We need to tap into the humanities. We need to tap into the knowledge in arts and philosophy and in business. And we need to combine that knowledge in our organisations. It was interesting, I was at a presentation a few months ago on tendering. I mean, one of the most boring subjects you could possibly imagine in town. And there was a guy there who stood up and he made a fantastic presentation. It just stood out. I was one of the presenters, by the way. It was far better than mine. And I went up to him afterwards and said, you know, he was working for John Holland, actually. And that was a fantastic presentation. I said, what's your background? You're obviously not a builder. And he was a philosophy student. And I thought, what a fantastic presentation. Totally different perspective on tendering and estimating. I mean, it's possible to do it there. It's definitely possible to do it in this area. So education is the key. We need to get people thinking differently. That's the key to building a more sustainable business. So we need to take responsibility for educating our supply chain, our subcontractors and our suppliers. And we need to take responsibility for educating our clients. Enlightened clients are the key to driving sustainability in our industry. And unfortunately, I don't know if I'll probably cancel here, but I'll say it again, there's not many of them in our industry. Most clients still prefer to employ on the basis of price rather than on the basis of value. Most clients still focus on short-term capital costs, not on long-term lifecycle costs. Clients must take the lead. It all starts with them. So that brings me to the penultimate point, is that we must reform our supply and demand chains. If we are working with people that we do not believe have the same values as us, we need to get rid of them. We need to be brutal about that. Not as easy as it sounds, because of course you're dependent on them, but we need to reform our supply chains, and we must take responsibility for this. We're only as strong as the weakest link. And finally, you've got to limit your initiatives. It's really important to focus on a limited number of initiatives and not spread yourself. Sustainability is a bottomless pit. You could pour enormous amounts of money into sustainability and get very little in return. So you really need to think about the initiatives that you get engaged in. You need to choose initiatives that are important to your key stakeholders as a business. First of all, therefore, you need to understand who your key stakeholders are. And this may make you feel very uncomfortable, actually. This is going to increase the chances of success, and it's going to increase the chances that your initiatives are going to be seen as genuine. You've got to choose initiatives that align with your own goals, your own values, and your own mission statement. Again, this is going to make sure that they're treated with less scepticism by society. You've got to choose initiatives that are sustainable in the long term, not just the latest fad. And you've got to choose initiatives where you've got a previous track record. Because this is going to increase the chances that you're actually going to make an impact, not only for the cause, but also for your business. So, I'm sure you're all glad to know that I've got 1 minute to go and I'm going to reach my conclusion. I'm going to actually end with a Chinese proverb, but I'll come back in honour to my good friend who's just about to leave us, Patrick Desau, to go to other clients. But I'm just going to conclude with a few points. If our industry is going to succeed in being more sustainable, it's important to be forthright about what we know, and it's important to be forthright about what we don't know. It's critical that companies base their strategies on evidence and not on anecdote. It's critical that companies acknowledge the risks as well as the opportunities of moving to more sustainable business models. And it's critical that we're all more critical of the evidence that's put before us. And as I said, I'm going to finish on this famous Chinese proverb, which really, to me, sums up what I'm trying to say in this presentation. It's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. So on that note, I will thank you for listening to me, if that's what you've been doing, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin. That was absolutely fascinating. And Martin's agreed that he will answer questions, so I open the floor for comments, questions, interactions. If Go. Yes.
I have a question. I work for a company in the manufacturing industry.
All right, great.
And we're lucky enough to be one of your success stories. We've saved over $500,000 now in various resource efficiency, energy waste, and water programs. But I personally think probably 80% of that success is due to staff engagement, not just collaboration, but within the company.
Right.
So I wanted to know what your, like, if you found anything in that area with your research, or what your opinion is.
Well, look, it's obvious that this comes back to the leadership issue. I think. I assume in your organisation there was strong leadership and support, and I think it comes down to if there is strong leadership and there's a belief that within the workforce that what you're doing aligns with the business values. I mean, I don't know what's the nature of the business.
It's a printing company, commercial printing company. Okay,
right. Yeah, I mean, clearly you've got to engage the workforce in anything that you do. It's not just external collaboration. I think that's the point you're making, that you have to, I think it's the same in any change initiative in any organisation. So I completely agree with you. I haven't got any sort of profound, as you can tell, I haven't got any profound insights to be able to offer you there. But yeah, it would seem to be. I think it's a good point to make and a lesson for everybody here, that you have to get your workforce engaged with whatever you do to be successful.
Questions? Yes.
Yep.
Just another observation, really. It's the language we use for this whole new area.
Yeah.
The word sustainability, I wrote a business recently, and I found the word sustainability just wasn't enough to say what it means.
Yeah, that's
because it means so many different things.
Yes.
And certainly in different industries it means different things.
Yes.
So I found myself using the word truly in front of it.
Oh, right, okay.
Just to try to use specifically the bit I meant.
Yes.
And the word green, I think, has the same problem.
Yes, I mean...
We've heard about greenwashing, and everything's green these days, and that's not what you're doing, it's still green.
Yeah.
And therefore people are using the word deep green.
Yes, that's the latest one I've come across.
Yeah. I just feel there's another word we need to come up with sometime soon.
Yeah, I mean, we had this debate in the faculty, I mean, with Peter as Dean previously, but we really struggle, as academics, of course, we really struggle with what sustainability meant, because it means so many things to so many different people, it actually doesn't mean anything at all. And you start seeing adjectives being used in increasing numbers. As you say, I mean, deeply green now, I mean, beyond green and extreme green I saw last week. I just wonder how many more adjectives we're going to come up with. And unfortunately, I'd hate to see this become a bandwagon. When I was writing this presentation, my mind kept on going back to the sort of 1980s when we had, the industry was seduced by, I can only use that word, because it was seduced by, management fads such as lean manufacturing, business process engineering, total quality management. We seem to jump onto these things, hoping that these sort of this managerial wonder drugs that can solve all our problems. And I really don't want to see sustainability become that. And I suppose that's one of the messages that
it becomes a marketing thing. You tick off. Yes, I've done it.
That's right. And it's meaningless then. And I think that's why I try to emphasise the fact that companies need to differentiate themselves. I mean, again, I come back. I know Brookfield Multiplex very well. But, I went to a wonderful presentation with Brookfield Multiplex and Stocklands last week in Shell Harbour with the Salvation Army. And they're doing a lot in the social sustainability area, and that really differentiates them. And that goes right back to the whole history of the company. They're not a company that blow their own trumpet, to be honest with you. But if you go through the company's history, then it's got a very, very strong social conscience. And so, it's just a different angle on sustainability that we don't hear about. And I think the temptation is, with the green message, that everything becomes subsumed into this environmental message. And it's much more than that. And, our industry's got such a huge contribution to make to society, socially as well as environmentally, and we mustn't forget that thing. And economically, of course, as well, employ 10% of the working population. So, it's an enormous industry. So, I don't know if that, yeah.
Obviously, there's a right way to put it, but there's a regulatory framework that sort of mandates standards around the building industry, including sustainability standards. And I'm just interested in what the evidence is where companies go outside that minimum set of standards to embody sustainability principles in projects about how that works out in business terms. Does that make sense?
No.
What do you want me to try?
It's only academic to ask the question, I can't understand it. I think I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so if what incentive is there for a company to
go beyond
minimum basic standards?
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, there was a slide in this presentation eons ago, which really talked about this, and you know, companies have a choice. They can do the minimum. They can take a compliance-based approach to this area, so they can just buy the legal and ethical responsibilities, their economic responsibilities to their shareholders, etc. Or they can decide to go further and engage in discretionary responsibilities beyond the minimum. And look, there's no evidence at all that doing that pays any dividends.
But how do they sustain that in an intensely competitive environment?
Well, I think that's the key to competitiveness.
Not so they don't, I'm just interested.
Yeah, I think everybody's doing the minimum. Everybody will be required to do the minimum. If you truly want to differentiate yourself as an organisation, you have to figure out, in which way you're going to go beyond the minimum. What are you going to do that's going to reflect your own corporate identity? And I think that's the key decision that has to be made. You have to sit back and say, what are we about as an organisation? What's our history? What are our traditions? What are who are the heroes and the villains in our organisation? What are the stories that define us? And what are we going to do in our organisation to align with that? And the organisations that have done that and actually sat back and thought about themselves before diving into this area are the ones that have succeeded the most. And that's the point I make when I talk about values-based strategies. The companies that we looked at that were the most successful were the companies that sat back and really reflected on their own corporate identity and culture before launching into this area. A lot of companies have launched into sustainability and suffered the consequences. They've gone ahead of the curve. A lot of things have changed behind them, which have actually done a lot of initiatives with it. So I think sometimes it's good to sit back and just take a breath and think about what you're doing. I suppose that's one of the messages I'm trying to hopefully people will take away from our research. I'm only standing up here and relaying the results of our research to you. Which is a sample bigger than 5, by the way.
I have a question.
Oh, do you?
If people do stand back and think and go on thinking, and the society and your statistics is moving on, what are the risks of doing nothing? Because I thought you were actually leading to an argument that might say, well, look, there are two sides of the debate, which there are in the community, and you can take either side, which means that some companies can actually decide to do nothing.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, for some companies it makes sense to stop and wait for a while, because what we don't want is for companies to move forward beyond their capacity and their capabilities. I think what we have at the present moment is an industry. It's really interesting. We have an industry where regulations are surging forward. We know how proactive the government is in many ways. But we have an industry that is made up of small to medium-sized enterprises. 90% of the industry employ 5 people or less. Right?
And listen to Alan Jones.
Yeah, maybe. And so, you've got a vast proportion of the industry where the regulations, and this, again, comes back to Peter's point, have surged ahead of the industry capabilities. We're struggling to keep up. And I think that's a real issue. And I think, there's a real risk for those organisations throwing themselves into initiatives which they can't afford to engage in. So I would argue that it's actually better for them to stand back and wait. And hopefully they come back to the collaboration again, that they need to move forward in partnership with an organisation which they can work with. And when you look at supply business configurations in our industry, we're quite good at collaborating between Tier 1 and Tier 2. We're not very good at deeply collaborating with our supply chains, so moving down, working with organisations like manufacturers and suppliers. So when I talk about collaborating, so we need to develop these partnerships. And I think it's the responsibility of companies like Portillo and Stocklands and Lend-Lease or wherever it is to actually educate these people and to bring them all out, and that may resolve this resource issue that and skills issue that we know we've got in the vast majority of the industry. And it's a risk for the big contractors as well.
And how's the university sector going?
I think the university is actually one of the biggest problems because, I mean, it's fascinating that when you actually look at the professional, we have to deliver courses here which fit in with professional accreditation. So our hands are tied by the professional accrediting bodies. And it's quite interesting when you actually look at the membership language that the professional bodies, such as, well, I won't say who they are because they'll be filmed, use in their recruitment literature. I mean, the word non-cognate jumps out at you. I mean, what does non-cognate mean? Does anybody study Latin? And it means of no knowledge. You know, someone with no knowledge. So we talk about people from outside our field as non-cognate, as having no knowledge. And that's the sort of knowledge that we need in our industry. So education, professional institutions drive us. You know, our inability as an organisation, as a university, I am happy to say this, to collaborate across different faculties and expose our students, because we're essentially in competition with each other in terms of different faculties, for students, to collaborate and give our students a liberal knowledge, a liberal education, not just train them, is the actual key to, in the longer term, to driving this whole area forward, in my opinion. So I think education is absolutely critical. And one of the great things we used to do in this university, we don't do anymore, when I first worked here 15 years ago, so we had a general studies course. Every student used to have to choose a subject from another faculty. In there, they don't do that anymore, and I thought that's one of the things that actually attracted me to this university. And I thought that was a wonderful thing. And you know, if I was running a business, I'd certainly be encouraging my staff to do things outside the square in other areas so they can bring that knowledge back to apply to the sustainability problem, because that's where the answer's going to lie. You know, anyway, that's my opinion, and I might not be right.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, my question is in regards to the small and medium-sized consulting firms.
Oh,
as you mentioned, dominate our industry. They often are resource constrained, time constrained, and they struggle to operate as a business, to progress as a business amongst various other constraints of clients' lack of sustainability initiatives, lack of education, skills, and all that stuff. Do you think there's a need for substantial research, action research, and initiatives, particularly required in keeping SMEs in mind? And you know, because I'm sure they have different types of issues and strategies you outline. Some of them might not be applicable. And so going further, you know, because they dominate the industry, what sort of initiatives are?
Well, I think that. Government's implementing a lot of initiatives to encourage small to medium-sized enterprises to innovate in the sustainability area. You've got the Enterprise Connect scheme, for example, that provides resources to companies, so actually advises to companies to actually innovate in this area. So, you know, I think it's a major issue in our industry. And I come back to the point that I think it's a response. You know, we have this hollowed out industry. That's the term, that's the current buzzword in academia when we talk about the industry. You know, we don't employ people anymore. You know, what we're doing as an industry is subcontracting everything out because it creates a flexible organisation that can respond to the cyclical nature of the industry. The problem with that, of course, is that you then end up with this hollowed out organisation that has that essentially has no capacity to invest in areas like training and development, research, etc. And I think it's the responsibility of major contractors to take their supply chain and demand chain, clients as well, by the hand, and actually work with them to actually sort out issues like this. And that's the only way that we're going to move the industry forward, in my opinion. SME, they aren't going to do it by themselves because they haven't got the resources, they're highly geared, they're not able to think about the long term, they're surviving on a day-to-day basis on cash flow. So the answer rests with clients, and it rests in the first place, and then it rests with the large developers to actually collaborate and to form partnerships with their supply chain. I find that, you know, that small and medium-sized enterprises are actually happy to enter into those sorts of relationships and are quite enthusiastic to do so. And you know, a lot of the best ideas come from small companies in the industry, because they're the ones with the knowledge about. They're actually doing the work. They're at the coalface. They know what they're doing. They're more in touch with the business environment in many instances. So companies that are engaged with them are actually losing a lot of knowledge. And I think there's definitely a role for research in that area. So there's a lot of research being done in the UK in SMEs in our sector.
One final question.
Getting back to the question of regulation and the fact that it makes, say, builders, developers, designers just do the minimum. Is it practical to offer bonuses for people who will go beyond the minimum and innovate?
It is. I don't know, I haven't thought that through, but I think there's an implied benefit in doing it anyway. Because if you look at the industry and what's been done, everybody's doing the same thing. More or less the same thing. Everybody's using the same language when they talk about sustainability. Look at the strategies of companies, they're all more or less doing the same thing. So I think if you go beyond the minimum, try and do something different, then I think it's quite easy to derive a competitive advantage from that. I don't know if the government's providing incentives for. There are.
Well, in some schemes, it's like in the old heritage trade-off scheme. If you do something that the government really wants, then you might be able to get density benefits or something like that. But it's very tricky. And I think because in the sustainability area we don't regulate as clearly yet about what are the benefits and the point you're making.
I think it is an industry that responds to regulation. I don't think it's an industry that moves by itself. If you look at the history of change in our industry, it's not. It's an innovative industry, a very innovative industry. We have to be to build these fantastic buildings. But we're not an industry that moves en masse unless we're pushed by regulation. So I think regulation in the construction sector is very important. In the UK, by 2016, all homes are meant to be, zero carbon. They've actually just reduced that target, by the way. But that's driven change in the UK industry. We haven't got that level of regulation here. Go to Germany, there's a high level of regulation there. Go to the US, there's very little regulation. In Japan, and they're doing worse. So I think there's definitely a relationship between regulation and change in our industry. But I think any incentive will. I think the incentive's there anyway. I don't think you need to externally provide it. I think it's quite easy to be competitive in this area. It's easy for me to stand up here as an academic and say it because I know how complicated it is as an area as well.
Well, I think that we've sort of just gone past our deadline, so I want to thank you very much indeed, Martin. That was absolutely fascinating. It's lighting